Hello, World 2 kiddos. Today we are going to be seeing one of my favorite kings, Henry VIII. This is the guy who causes England to be Protestant. And it is all because of this young thing here. Because of his desire to get Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII will actually start the Reformation in England. The English Reformation will be a political Reformation. Remember when we talked about those causes and we talked about monarchs wanting more power than kings? Well, this is our example. So Henry VIII, one of Mrs. Keating's favorite English kings. Henry VIII is married 6 times. Catherine of Aragon, his Catholic wife, Anne Boleyn, he will divorce Catherine to marry this young thing, Anne Boleyn, and this will cause a break with the Catholic Church. Then he will marry Jane Seymour, who will give him, and each of these, she will give him Mary Tudor, who will rule as the Catholic. She will give Elizabeth I, who will go down as one of the greatest English queens. And Jane Seymour will have Edward, who will be a sickly child who will move England even more Protestant. As a result of Henry's marriages, this is his son who will have no power because he is illegitimate. These are the 3 most important. This is Mary, Catherine's daughter, Elizabeth, Anne's daughter, and Edward. Even though Edward is the youngest, he will rule first because he is the male. So let's begin with our story. Why does Henry break with the Catholic Church? Well, basically, he wanted Anne. And Anne said, Anne was smart. Her sister, believe it or not, was a mistress of Henry VIII. And when Henry was done with her, she was thrown aside. Anne is too smart for this, and she's like, if you want me, I want a ring on my finger, and I want to be Queen of England. So Henry, by this point, is married to Catherine of Aragon. Even though Catherine has had many pregnancies, they have only had one child who is growing up healthy, and that is their daughter Mary. He asked Catherine for a divorce because remember, he wants Anne. And Catherine, by this point, is kind of old and she's kind of old-fashioned. And Henry wants a divorce. He wants the new young trophy wife. So he asks Catherine for an annulment. Because remember, the Catholic Church does not support divorce. Catherine says, no, the Catholic Church will not grant the annulment. Annul means that the marriage never happened in the eyes of God, and therefore it never happened, so Henry would be free to remarry Anne. The Pope refuses because Catherine of Aragon, there's a couple things. One, Catherine of Aragon was Henry VIII's brother's wife. She is his widow. Henry VIII, his brother, the marriage lasted less than 6 months. He was sickly. There was a rule in the Catholic Church. The Pope gave a dispensation. Henry gets to marry Catherine. Catherine and Henry have this child. Then all of a sudden Henry's like, I don't think that God is blessing my marriage. He wants Anne. Anne's saying not until I get a ring on my finger. So he wants this divorce. The Pope refuses. Catherine of Aragon is the aunt of Charles V. Charles V is the King of Spain and the Habsburg Empire. This is Charles V who ordered the Edict of Worms against Luther. He is not going to want his aunt to lose her position. So Anne Boleyn sees that Henry's eyes starting to wander. So what happens? Anne gets pregnant because she lets Henry into their bed. Now Henry's stuck because Anne is going around the palace going, I'm going to have the king's baby. I'm going to have a boy. Well, Henry knows if this child is born out of wedlock, this male heir is no longer going to be able to take the throne. So he needs to force the issue. The Pope says no, so in 1531 he calls the English Church Council. The English church, he says, okay, and the English church says, you know what? We don't need a pope. We can run our English church, and they made Henry head of the Church of England. So Henry gets Parliament, which is the body that helps the king rule, passes for Henry the Act of Supremacy. And you need to know this is going to be an important act, and it was one of your vocabulary words. It makes him head of the church in England. So basically, instead of praying to the Pope, you now pray to King Henry. Instead of sending your taxes to Rome, you send them to Henry. This is the formal separation. It doesn't matter that the church has excommunicated Henry, because anybody who's in your country is still religious, because it's now the Church of England. Henry was raised to be a priest, so he kept the Catholic practices and traditions. This is just a political split. However, he did close the monasteries, and he took the church lands to help finance. So, what ends up happening, Anne has a baby. And lo and behold, this Anne has another girl. Well, Henry is like, wait a minute, I have a girl. Anne is high maintenance. Henry executes her. He marries Jane Seymour, and she will give him a boy. So Henry is going to have 2 Protestant children and 1 Catholic child. So what ends up happening is Henry is eventually going to die, which is going to leave Edward in charge. Edward is 15. There is not much that goes on, but his advisors are Protestant, and they are moving the Church of England more towards the Protestant influence. This is where you're beginning to have Calvin and Luther come into the church, not their writings and their teachings, and they're beginning to look at their prayers. Then Edward dies. Well, under the order of succession, Mary is the next in line. She becomes queen, and Mary is Catholic. Mary was 12 years old when her parents split, and it affected Mary because Henry was not the nicest father, and Anne was not the nicest stepmother. Kind of screwed up Mary a little bit. Mary wants to go back to the time when her father and mother were together. And her goal is going to return England to the Catholic Church, even though England has been away from the Catholic Church for a number of years. One of the first things to do, her cousin, Charles V, arranges for Mary to marry her cousin, Philip II of Spain. Then what happens is Mary then begins to persecute all the Protestants in England. She gets the name Bloody Mary because she is literally burning people at the stake for their Protestant beliefs. So what's beginning to go into England when Mary is on the throne is you're beginning to have a civil war beginning to develop between Catholics and Protestants. Mary will die. Very, very tragic story what happens to Mary. Mary is, like I said, she wants this baby so bad, but it never happens. So that brings Elizabeth to the throne. Elizabeth will have to clean up the mess between the Protestants and Catholics. So Elizabeth creates the Anglican Church, again like her father, the Church of England. She's going to take the Protestant teachings, but she's going to keep the Catholic ritual and structure. So in the English, where in the most Protestant churches you don't have the hierarchy, you don't have the bishops, you don't have the archbishops, they keep them in the Church of England. But the head of the Church of England is the king, or in this case, the queen. So the monarch remains head of the church. Following the Protestant tradition, the priests may marry, the Mass is in English, Catholic tradition, having that hierarchy, the bishops, the service. They follow very similar service to the Catholics, but you're saying more of the Protestant prayers. Now, while Elizabeth is in power, one of the things that she's going to have, and I don't have a slide for, oh yes I do. So, Elizabeth, so she does this, but the problem is, remember how I said Mary was married to Philip II of Spain? Well, it wasn't a love match. In fact, this is the type of husband he was. While Mary was on her deathbed, he was proposing marriage to Elizabeth. Elizabeth is going to have to fight because the Queen of Scotland, Mary, is Catholic. She has a strong claim. Her grandfather is Henry VII. Elizabeth I's grandfather is Elizabeth II. Mary, something with Mary did not have a successful rule. She is overthrown in Scotland. She flees to England. She is for a number of times imprisoned by her cousin Elizabeth. After many failed attempts, Elizabeth executes Mary, Queen of Scots. Philip is a supporter of Mary, Queen of Scots. His dream, he's very Catholic, he wants to return England to the Catholic fold. He sends the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada is a large naval. It is going to be the beginning of the naval dominance, and it's going to be when England rises and Spain begins to decline because Elizabeth destroys the Armada. The Spanish Armada is sunk. And at this time, this is going to be when England will remain Protestant, but it will also begin to move up as one of the world's greatest naval powers.